I'm Autumn Reynolds, 35, and I've spent the last decade building my career as an architectural designer in Chicago. My mother Barbara has always had strong opinions about my life choices, especially my apparent failure to settle down. What she doesn't know is that I've been married to James Mitchell for over a year now. Last Sunday at our family dinner, she laughed and said, "No wonder you're still single at 35. If only she knew the gold band hidden on a chain beneath my sweater." Before I dive into how I ended up hiding my marriage from my own mother, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to keep a secret to protect yourself, because this story might just validate your choices. Growing up in a small suburb outside of Boston, I learned early that my mother had a very specific vision for my life. Barbara Reynolds was the undisputed queen of our neighborhood, known for her immaculate home, her perfectly coordinated outfits, and her very traditional values. By the time I was 10, I already knew her blueprint for my future: college, but not too far away, marriage by 25, first child by 28, and a life comfortably mimicking hers, centered around family, church, and community functions. "A woman's greatest achievement is building a happy home," she would tell me as we prepared Sunday dinner. I would nod, but even as a child, I found myself drawing floor plans for buildings instead of dreaming about my future wedding. My father, Thomas, was a quiet man who mostly deferred to my mother. He worked as an accountant, coming home each evening to read his newspaper while Mom controlled every aspect of our household. I sometimes caught glimpses of resistance in his eyes when Mom's controlling nature went too far, but he rarely spoke up. High school was when the first major conflicts began. While Mom pushed me toward home economics and suggested I join clubs where I could meet nice young men from good families, I was loading up on math and science courses. My guidance counselor recognized my talent for spatial thinking and encouraged me to consider architecture. When I brought home brochures for architecture programs, Mom's lips thinned to a disapproving line. "Honey, that's such a difficult field for women," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Why not interior design? You could work flexible hours when you have children." The turning point came when I received a partial scholarship to Northwestern University in Chicago. Mom had expected me to attend the local state college while living at home. The fight was epic: 3 days of tears, cold silences, and finally Dad stepping in. "Let her go, Barb," he said quietly. "She needs to find her own way." I'll never forget the look on Mom's face, a mixture of betrayal and disbelief that Dad had contradicted her. But I packed my bags that fall and headed to Chicago, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by my newfound freedom. College was transformative. For the first time, I could make decisions without considering my mother's reaction first. I cut my long brown hair into a stylish bob, traded my conservative wardrobe for something more modern, and threw myself into my studies. I made the dean's list consistently and secured competitive internships each summer. During those years, I met Rachel Kim, who became my best friend and strongest ally. Unlike me, Rachel had parents who celebrated her independence and ambition. Through her family, I glimpsed what supportive parenting looked like. "Your mom sounds like a nightmare," Rachel would say after I'd received yet another phone call questioning my life choices. "You know that's not normal, right?" I knew, intellectually, but emotionally, Mom's approval still mattered more than I wanted to admit. After graduation, I landed a position at Greenfield and Associates, an architectural firm known for sustainable design. I rented a small apartment in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood and began building my adult life. Mom expected me to return to Boston, and when I didn't, our relationship grew increasingly strained. Her calls followed a predictable pattern: first, pleasantries, then updates on family and neighborhood gossip, finally, the inevitable questions about my dating life. "Janet's daughter Amy just got engaged, and she's only 24, she would say. "Such a lovely young man from a good family. Her mother is so happy." As I progressed through my 20s, these comments intensified. Each family gathering became an interrogation. Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas celebrations, Easter Sunday, all featured some variation of "When are you going to settle down?" or "Your biological clock is ticking, you know." By 30, I had been promoted twice and was leading my own small team at work. I had dated occasionally but found that most relationships fizzled out due to my work commitments or, frankly, my reluctance to introduce anyone to my mother. Mom had taken to sending me links to dating sites specially designed for busy professionals and news articles about freezing eggs. "I'm just concerned about your happiness," she would insist when I pushed back. But her concern felt more like judgment. At family gatherings, she would parade my cousin's marital success in front of me like exhibits at a trial where I stood accused of failing at womanhood. There was Melissa with her dentist husband and 3 children, Jessica with her charming investment banker spouse, and Kate who had sacrificed her career to raise her children, a decision Mom pointedly praised in my presence. Rachel had become my emotional safety valve. Over wine in my apartment or during our weekend brunches, I would vent about Mom's latest comments. "You need to set boundaries," Rachel advised. Or just tell her to mind her own business. Easy for Rachel to say. Her parents celebrated her promotion to marketing director with an expensive dinner. They asked about her work, her apartment hunt, her travel plans, not just about when she planned to marry. The irony was that by focusing so much on my career, I had created a life that brought me genuine satisfaction. I loved my work, had good friends, traveled regularly, and had recently purchased a beautiful condo overlooking Lake Michigan. By any reasonable standard, I was successful, just not by Barbara Reynolds' definition. Still, I couldn't entirely shake the feeling that I was somehow failing. During sleepless nights, I'd wonder if Mom was right. Was I missing out on something fundamental by not prioritizing marriage and children? These doubts would creep in despite my rational understanding that her views were outdated and unfair. I developed strategies to minimize the damage of our interactions. I scheduled brief, regular phone calls to prevent her from claiming I was neglecting her. I kept conversations focused on neutral topics. I limited home visits to no more than 3 days. And I selectively shared information about my life, emphasizing aspects she would approve of while omitting those she wouldn't. It wasn't honest, and it certainly wasn't healthy, but it was survivable. Until James walked into my life and changed everything. I met James Mitchell at the Chicago Sustainable Architecture Conference in spring 2023. I was 34 then, presenting a panel on eco-friendly materials in urban renovation projects. James was in the audience, and during the Q&A session, he asked a thoughtful question about balancing historical preservation with modern sustainability needs, a question that demonstrated he'd actually been listening, unlike the man before him who had clearly just wanted to hear his own voice. After the panel, James approached me with a coffee in each hand. "I figured you could use this after fielding all those questions," he said, offering me one of the cups. "I'm James Mitchell. Your presentation was exceptional." James had warm hazel eyes, dark hair with a touch of silver at the temples, and a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. He was 38, ran his own architectural restoration company, and specialized in breathing new life into historic buildings while making them more environmentally sustainable. "I'm working on the old Marshall building downtown," he explained as we sat in the conference center's atrium. "The owners want to maintain its 1920s character while achieving modern energy efficiency standards. It's a fascinating challenge." Our coffee break stretched into dinner that evening at a small Thai restaurant near the conference center. James was different from men I'd dated before, thoughtful, genuinely interested in my work, and refreshingly free of ego. He listened when I spoke and asked questions that showed he valued my perspective. "My ex-wife used to say I was married to my buildings," he said with a self-deprecating smile. She wasn't entirely wrong. The mention of an ex-wife might have been a red flag with someone else, but James spoke about his previous marriage with a maturity that impressed me. They had married young, grown apart as their careers took them in different directions, and eventually divorced amicably after 7 years together. "The experience made me cautious," he admitted. "But it also taught me what I really want in a partnership." As we finished our meal, I realized we'd been talking for nearly 3 hours. James asked for my number, and I found myself hoping he would use it. He did, the very next day, inviting me to tour the Marshall Building renovation. Walking through the partially restored Art Deco lobby, I was struck both by the beauty of the space and by James's passion for his work. His eyes lit up as he described how they'd sourced period-appropriate materials and modified them for better insulation. Most people think sustainability means everything has to look modern and minimal, he said, running his hand along an ornate column. I love proving that wrong. Our professional connection quickly evolved into something more personal. We began seeing each other regularly, dinners after work, weekend walks along Lake Michigan, visits to architectural landmarks throughout the city. James was thoughtful in ways I hadn't experienced before. He remembered details from our conversations, respected my work commitments, and never made me feel guilty for my ambition. About a month into dating, I mentioned my mother during dinner at his apartment. She sounds challenging, he said diplomatically after I described her latest phone call lamenting my single status. That's one word for it, I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. She means well, I guess. She just can't understand why I wouldn't want exactly the life she has. James was quiet for a moment, swirling his wine thoughtfully. My parents divorced when I was 12, he finally said. It was messy and painful, which is probably why I tried so hard to make my own marriage work, even when it was clear we weren't right for each other. Family expectations are powerful things. That night marked a turning point in our relationship. We began sharing more, not just about architecture and design, but about our fears, hopes, and the experiences that had shaped us. I told him about growing up with Barbara's relentless expectations and my complicated feelings of both wanting her approval and resenting her judgment. James shared that his divorce had been followed by a period of intense self-reflection. I realized I'd been living according to a schedule that wasn't mine, married by 30, partner in the firm by 35, children by 40. When my marriage ended, I had to figure out what I actually wanted, not what I thought I should want. 3 months into our relationship, neither of us had mentioned the word love, but I felt it growing between us, solid and real, like the foundations of a well-built home. James made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. He valued exactly the parts of me that my mother seemed most disappointed by: my independence, my dedication to my career, my unwillingness to conform to traditional expectations. 6 months in, we took a weekend trip to a small bed and breakfast near Lake Michigan. Walking along the shore at sunset, hand in hand, I realized I was happier than I'd been in years. I've never told my mother about anyone I'd dated, I admitted as we watched the waves. Not seriously, anyway. She would immediately start planning the wedding and naming our future children. James squeezed my hand. My parents don't know about you either, he said. After my divorce, my mother started setting me up with her friends' daughters. I had to establish a firm no interference in my love life policy. We looked at each other and burst out laughing, recognizing our shared experience. Is that what we're doing? Interfering in each other's love lives? I asked, still smiling. I certainly hope so, James replied, pulling me close. Because I'm falling in love with you, Autumn Reynolds. The words sent a thrill through me. I'm falling in love with you too, I whispered back. That night, as we lay in bed together in our quaint room at the bed and breakfast, James asked, "Do you think you'll ever tell your mother about us?" I stared at the ceiling, considering. Eventually, I suppose. When I feel strong enough to weather the storm of questions and expectations that will follow. No rush, he assured me. Some things are too precious to share before they're ready. As our relationship deepened, James became my sanctuary. The place where I could be completely myself without fear of judgment. With him, I didn't have to justify my career choices or defend my life decisions. He celebrated my promotion to senior design architect with genuine pride, framing the announcement from the firm's newsletter and hanging it in his home office. Yet even as we grew closer, I kept him separate from my family life. When Mom called, I didn't mention James. When I flew home for holidays, I went alone. It wasn't that I was ashamed of him, quite the opposite. I was protecting what we had from my mother's overwhelming expectations and inevitable criticism. "You don't talk about her like you love her," James observed one evening after I'd finished a tense phone call with Mom. "I do love her," I said automatically, then paused. "But I don't always like her. And I definitely don't always feel loved by her, at least not for who I actually am." James nodded thoughtfully. "That's the difference, isn't it? Between loving someone for who they are versus loving the idea of who you want them to be." His words resonated deeply. James loved me for exactly who I was. My mother loved the daughter she had imagined, a version of me that had never existed. As we approached our 1-year anniversary, I realized I had never felt so secure in a relationship. James had become my best friend, my confidant, and my partner in every sense of the word. We complemented each other perfectly, challenging each other intellectually while providing emotional support that made both of us stronger. What I didn't know then was that James was about to change everything with a question I wasn't expecting, and a proposal that would force me to confront the boundaries I'd so carefully constructed between the different parts of my life. The weekend of our 1-year anniversary, James surprised me with a trip back to the same lakeside bed and breakfast where we'd first said "I love you." The April weather was perfect, sunny but cool, with the lake reflecting the blue sky above. After a day of hiking along the shore and visiting local art galleries, we returned to the B&B to change for dinner. I was applying mascara in the bathroom when I noticed James standing in the doorway, watching me with an intensity that made my heart skip. "Everything okay?" I asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Better than okay," he said. "I just like looking at you. At us. At what we've built together." At dinner that night, in a small restaurant overlooking the water, James seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. He kept touching his jacket pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. After our dessert plates were cleared, James reached across the table for my hands. "This past year has been the happiest of my life," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You've changed everything for me, Autumn." My heart began to race as he slid from his chair and knelt beside our table. The few other diners in the restaurant fell silent. "I had a whole speech prepared," James said with a shaky laugh, "but looking at you now, I can only think of one thing: I want to build a life with you. Not because it's what anyone expects, but because loving you feels like the most natural thing in the world." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a vintage emerald ring surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Autumn Reynolds, will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," I finally managed. "Absolutely yes." The other diners applauded as James slipped the ring onto my finger and kissed me. It was perfect. Intimate, sincere, and entirely about us, not a performance for others or a box to check on some predetermined timeline. Later that night, curled against James in our room, reality began to intrude on our happiness. "So," he said, tracing patterns on my arm, "when do we tell our families?" The question hung in the air between us. I twisted my new ring nervously, already imagining my mother's reaction, not just joy for my engagement, but vindication that I had finally done what she had always wanted, followed by immediate attempts to take over every aspect of the wedding planning. "What if?" I started, then hesitated, afraid my thoughts would sound crazy. "What if we didn't?" James propped himself up on one elbow to look at me. "Didn't tell them?" "Not forever," I clarified. "Just, what if we got married first, on our own terms? Something small and intimate, just for us. And then told them afterward." Instead of looking shocked, James appeared thoughtful. "Like an elopement?" "Not exactly," I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. "More like a private ceremony. With Rachel there, and maybe your brother Michael. Our actual nearest and dearest. No family drama, no mother trying to put me in her preserved wedding dress, no arguments about guest lists or floral arrangements." James was quiet for so long I began to worry I'd offended him. Finally, he spoke. "I've done the big wedding before," he said softly. "All I care about is being married to you. The how of it doesn't matter to me." Relief flooded through me. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "Mind?" He laughed. Autumn, after watching you deal with your mother's phone calls for a year, I completely understand why you'd want to do this your own way. He kissed me gently. If a private ceremony is what you want, then that's what we'll do. Over the next 2 months, we planned our wedding in happy secrecy. We decided on a simple ceremony at the Chicago Cultural Center. A beautiful historic building with stunning architecture that felt perfect for us. Rachel was thrilled when I asked her to be my witness, while James's brother Michael was equally supportive. Mom and Dad will be disappointed to miss it, Michael said when James told him our plans, but they'll understand. Eventually. My dress was not the poofy princess gown my mother had always envisioned for me, but a sleek, modern sheath that made me feel both elegant and completely myself. James wore a well-tailored navy suit that brought out the blue in his hazel eyes. The day itself, June 17, 2023, was perfect in its simplicity. With only Rachel and Michael present, we exchanged vows we had written ourselves in the magnificent Tiffany-domed room. I promised to respect James's independence while building our partnership. He vowed to support my dreams as fervently as his own. We exchanged simple gold bands that symbolized our commitment without flashiness or pretension. By the authority vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said, and just like that, I became Mrs. Autumn Mitchell, though I planned to keep Reynolds professionally. Afterward, the 4 of us had dinner at a small upscale restaurant where the chef, a client of James's, had prepared a special menu for us. We toasted with champagne, ate exquisite food, and celebrated not just our marriage but the perfect secrecy in which we'd accomplished it. To doing things your way, Rachel said, raising her glass. And to facing the music, eventually, Michael added with a knowing smile. That night, in our condo, now officially our shared home, James and I discussed when we would tell our families. We should do it soon, he suggested. Before someone accidentally lets it slip. I nodded, knowing he was right, but already feeling anxiety at the thought of my mother's reaction. Let's enjoy being newlyweds for a little while first, I said. Maybe after the summer? Once we're back from our trip to Montreal? James agreed, and we settled into married life with surprising ease. We had already been practically living together, spending most nights at either his place or mine, so the day-to-day adjustments were minimal. What changed was more internal, a sense of peace and rightness that came from having made this commitment on our own terms. I wore my engagement ring and wedding band at work and among friends, but whenever I visited my mother, I slipped them onto a gold chain I wore beneath my clothes. James's ring went into my purse during those visits. It felt like a betrayal of our vows, but I justified it as a temporary necessity. Just until we're ready to tell them, I assured James after returning from a tense weekend at my parents' house, during which my mother had made no fewer than 5 comments about my persistent single status. James never pressured me, but I could tell the secrecy was weighing on him. He was proud to be my husband and hated having to hide it. I promised myself that after our Montreal trip in September, I would find the courage to tell my family the truth. But September came and went. Then October. Then the holidays loomed, and I convinced myself it would be cruel to ruin Thanksgiving and Christmas with news that would upset my mother. After the new year, I promised James on Christmas Eve, as we celebrated quietly in our condo before flying separately to visit our respective families. He nodded, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Our secret marriage was beginning to feel less like a mutual choice and more like my unresolved issues controlling our lives. By January 2024, James and I had been secretly married for 7 months. What had initially felt like an intimate choice just for us had evolved into an exhausting charade. Our home life was blissful, we cooked together, worked on design projects side by side, and fell more deeply in love each day. But outside our apartment, we were forced to navigate a complex web of half-truths and omissions. The practical challenges of hiding a marriage proved more complicated than I'd anticipated. There were the obvious things: maintaining separate addresses on official documents sent to my parents' home, keeping my name unchanged on social media, removing James's toiletries and clothes from sight when my mother threatened to visit, though thankfully, Chicago's distance from Boston made these visits rare. But there were unexpected difficulties too. Like when I ran into my mother's friend Susan at a conference in New York and had to quickly slip my rings into my pocket. Or when James's parents sent a holiday card addressed to both of us, which arrived the same day my mother was calling me on video chat, forcing James to hide in our bedroom for the duration of the conversation. "This is getting absurd," James said afterward, emerging from his hiding place with an exasperated expression. "I feel like I'm having an affair with my own wife." He was right. Our marriage had become the elephant in the room during every family interaction. Each phone call with my mother required careful editing of my life, excising any mention of James or our shared existence. I became expert at deflection, turning conversations away from my personal life and towards safer topics: work, local news, distant relatives. Professionally, things were soaring for both of us. I was promoted to lead designer at my firm, taking on more prestigious projects and larger teams. James's restoration business was thriving, with contracts for 3 major historic buildings in the Chicago area. We were rising stars in our field, occasionally featured in architecture magazines and local news stories about urban revitalization. After one such article included a photo of us together at a project site, captioned only with our professional titles. I spent 3 anxious days waiting for my mother to come across it online. She never mentioned it, and I realized how little attention she paid to my actual work, the thing that brought me the most pride and satisfaction. Rachel and Michael, our only confidants, became our safety valves. "You realize this is completely unsustainable, right?" Rachel said during one of our brunches, while James was meeting with clients. "The longer you wait, the worse her reaction will be." "I know," I admitted, pushing food around my plate. "But every time I think about telling her, I imagine her making it all about her, how I deprived her of a wedding, how I've denied her the chance to see her only daughter get married." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's exactly what she'll say. And you'll survive it, just like you've survived everything else she's thrown at you." There were close calls that spring. During a family dinner in Boston for my father's birthday, my aunt noticed the chain around my neck and asked what I was wearing. I mumbled something about a vintage pendant and quickly changed the subject. Later, my cousin's 4-year-old daughter, playing with my purse while I was in the bathroom, found James's wedding ring in an interior pocket. Thankfully, she simply thought it was a toy and had moved on to something else by the time I returned. Each near discovery left me shaken and increasingly convinced that our secret couldn't hold much longer. Yet still I delayed, making excuses to James about waiting for the right moment that somehow never materialized. The strain began to show in our marriage. James never explicitly complained, but I could feel him withdrawing slightly, holding back parts of himself as I continued to hold our marriage back from the world. Our first wedding anniversary in June should have been a joyous milestone. Instead, it highlighted the absurdity of our situation. We celebrated at a remote restaurant where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew, exchanged heartfelt cards we couldn't display on our mantel, and returned to our condo feeling both connected and strangely isolated. "What are we doing, Autumn?" James asked that night as we lay in bed. "Are we going to celebrate our 5th anniversary in secret too? Our 10th? Will we hide our children, if we have them, from their grandparents?" The questions hung in the air between us, impossible to dismiss yet equally impossible for me to answer. The future James was describing sounded ridiculous even to me, yet I couldn't seem to find the courage to change our trajectory. "I'll tell her soon," I promised, as I had so many times before. James nodded but said nothing more, his silence more damning than any argument. In July, we were invited to my cousin Melissa's baby shower in Boston. It would be the first family event since our anniversary, and I debated whether to attend. "You should go," James said when I raised the possibility of sending a gift instead. "Your family is important to you, even with all the complications." "Come with me," I blurted out, surprising both of us. "We could tell them together." Hope flashed across James's face. "Are you serious?" For a moment, I imagined it, arriving at the shower with James by my side, our rings displayed proudly, facing whatever reaction came our way together. Then fear reasserted itself. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I'm not ready yet. The disappointment in James's eyes was unbearable. He nodded once and left the room without another word. I went to the shower alone, wearing my rings on their usual chain beneath my blouse. Throughout the event, I watched Melissa receive congratulations and loving support from the entire family, including my beaming mother. I thought about the family James and I might have someday, and how we deserved the same open celebration. On the flight back to Chicago, I made a decision: I would tell my mother the truth after my cousin's baby was born in September. It seemed important somehow not to overshadow that family milestone. Just another excuse, perhaps, but one that let me set a concrete deadline for myself. When I shared this plan with James that night, his relief was palpable. "Thank you," he said simply, holding me close. "I've missed feeling like we're on the same team." His words hit me harder than any criticism could have. In trying to avoid my mother's disappointment, I had been disappointing the person who mattered most to me, my husband, who had stood by me patiently through all my delays and fears. For the next 2 months, our marriage regained some of its earlier joy as we began making plans for going public. We discussed how to tell each of our families, practiced responses to anticipated reactions, and even looked into hosting a small reception in October for family and friends to celebrate our union. I felt lighter, more authentic, as if by committing to the truth I had already shed some of the secrecy's burden. James seemed happier too, more engaged and affectionate. Then, in late August, just weeks before my self-imposed deadline, my mother called with news: she had organized a special family dinner for the Sunday after next. My cousin Melissa had had her baby early, a healthy little boy, and Mom wanted to celebrate with an intimate gathering at her house. "Everyone will be there," she said excitedly. "And I specifically want you to come, Autumn. It's not right for you to be so disconnected from the family." I agreed to attend, seeing it as a sign. This would be the perfect opportunity to share our news in person, with the whole family present. I would finally introduce them to James, explain our private wedding, and deal with whatever fallout followed. That was the plan, at least. What I didn't anticipate was how thoroughly my courage would desert me when actually faced with my mother and her expectations. Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Boston had always followed the same ritual for as long as I could remember. Mom would spend all day cooking, filling the house with delicious aromas and creating a spread that could feed twice the number of people actually attending. Dad would handle drinks, making sure everyone's glass stayed full while providing a buffer between Mom's intensity and the rest of us. Guests would arrive precisely at 5, exclaim over the food, and settle into the living room for appetizers and catch-up conversations. This particular Sunday in early September 2024 seemed no different on the surface. I had flown in that morning and taken a cab directly to their familiar colonial-style house in the suburbs. Mom greeted me with her usual once-over, a quick head-to-toe assessment that never failed to make me feel inadequate, before pulling me into a perfumed hug. "You look tired, honey," she said, her habitual opening critique. "Are they working you too hard at that firm?" I forced a smile. "Good to see you too, Mom." Inside, the house was immaculate as always, with fresh flowers on every surface and the dining table already set with Mom's best china. The familiar setting made me feel like I was regressing to adolescence, my adult life in Chicago seemingly a distant reality. My father gave me a warmer welcome, his hug genuine. "Good to have you home, Autumn," he said, and I felt a pang of guilt about the secret I'd been keeping from him too. By 5:30, the house was full. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Dave, my cousins Melissa and Jessica with their husbands, and a few family friends made up the gathering of about 12 people. Baby Noah, the guest of honor, was being passed around and admired by everyone. When he came to me, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, and I felt a sudden longing for the family James and I had discussed having someday. "You're a natural," Melissa said, watching me with the baby. "You should think about having one of your own before too long." I smiled noncommittally and handed Noah back to her, conscious of my mother hovering nearby, clearly hoping I would express some newfound maternal yearning. Dinner was served at 6 sharp. Mom had outdone herself with a roast, 3 vegetable sides, homemade rolls, and 2 kinds of potatoes. Everyone took their places at the table, and Dad said grace as he always did. I fingered the chain around my neck, feeling the reassuring presence of my rings beneath my blouse. The conversation flowed around me, neighborhood news, updates on people I barely remembered, and endless baby talk. I contributed when necessary but felt increasingly disconnected from it all. These people were my family, yet they knew nothing about my actual life, my achievements, or the man I loved. My phone vibrated in my pocket with a text. Discreetly, I checked it under the table. James, hope the dinner is going well. I miss you. Love you. His simple message grounded me, a reminder of my real life in Chicago. I typed back quickly. Me, miss you too. Will call when I can get away. Love you more. I looked up to find my mother watching me with narrowed eyes. Who are you texting at the dinner table? She asked, her tone making it clear she found the behavior rude. Just work, I lied, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Sorry. Melissa chose that moment to share some news. She and her husband Matt were planning to buy the house next door to my parents. We want Noah to grow up close to his grandparents, she explained, beaming at my mother and father. Family is everything. That's wonderful. Mom exclaimed, clapping her hands together. I can help with Noah whenever you need. And your children will grow up together with Jessica's kids, just like you girls did. Jessica, already mother to 2 toddlers, raised her glass. To family traditions continuing with the next generation. Everyone clinked glasses and drank. I participated mechanically, feeling increasingly like an alien observer at this tableau of traditional family life. As dessert was being served, Mom's famous apple pie with vanilla ice cream, the conversation inevitably turned to me. So, Autumn, my Aunt Carol began with what she probably thought was helpful interest. Any special men in your life these days? Before I could answer, Mom laughed, a short, dismissive sound that cut through the ambient noise of the dining room. No wonder you're still single at 35, she said, shaking her head with a mixture of amusement and genuine perplexity. Always working, always on that phone. Men want a woman who makes them a priority. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Even Dad, usually quick to defuse Mom's more pointed comments, seemed at a loss. Something inside me cracked. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of a year of secrecy, or the contrast between the loving text from my husband and my mother's casual dismissal of my worth as a woman. Whatever the cause, I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd experienced before. Actually, I began, my voice steadier than I felt, But Jessica, perhaps sensing dangerous waters, quickly cut in. Did I tell everyone that Tom got a promotion at the bank? We're thinking of renovating the kitchen now. The moment passed, conversation shifted, and I was left with my unspoken truth burning in my throat. I excused myself to the bathroom, hands shaking as I locked the door behind me. I pulled out my phone and called James. Hey, he answered on the first ring. Everything okay? No, I whispered, trying to keep my voice down. She just. God, James, she laughed about me being single at 35, right in front of everyone. As if my entire worth is measured by whether I have a husband. James was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he finally said. That's awful. What did you say? Nothing, I admitted, shame washing over me. I almost told everyone right then, but Jessica changed the subject, and I lost my nerve. Autumn, James said gently, you need to tell them. Not for me, not for them, but for yourself. This is eating you alive. He was right. This double life had become unsustainable, not just practically but emotionally. I was allowing my mother's narrow vision of success to erase my actual achievements, including my wonderful marriage. I will, I promised. Tonight. After everyone leaves. Do you want me to stay on the line? I can be there with you, in a way. The offer touched me deeply. No, this is something I need to do myself. But thank you for offering. After hanging up, I returned to the dining room with a new sense of purpose. I would get through this dinner, wait for the extended family to leave, and then have a long overdue conversation with my parents. I even removed the chain from my neck and slipped my rings onto my finger in the bathroom, a symbolic commitment to the truth I was finally ready to tell. For the remainder of the evening, I felt strangely calm. My mother's comments about my career, my appearance, my life choices, all slid off me like water. I knew who I was, what I had built with James, and it was time my family knew too. As the gathering began to break up around 9, with hugs and promises to get together soon, I helped my mother clear the table while Dad saw people out. My rings remained in my pocket, ready to be revealed at the right moment. But as I was loading the dishwasher, Mom began talking about her friend's daughter, another supposed model of womanly achievement. "Sarah just got engaged to a wonderful surgeon," she said, handing me dishes to rinse. "Her mother is over the moon. They're planning a June wedding at the country club." I nodded absently, rehearsing my own announcement in my head. "You know," Mom continued, "I've accepted that you might never give me the joy of planning your wedding. Some women are just meant for career success instead of family happiness. It's a shame, but—" "Mom," I interrupted, unable to bear another word, "I need to tell you something important." She stopped, dishes in hand, and looked at me expectantly. My father walked in from seeing the last guests out, sensing the tension in the room. "What is it, honey?" he asked. This was my moment, the perfect opening I'd been waiting for. I took a deep breath, ready to finally reveal my truth. Then Mom's phone rang. She checked it, exclaimed, "It's Melissa," and answered immediately, turning away from me to coo into the phone about baby Noah. The interruption broke my resolve. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and coat and headed for the door. "Autumn?" Dad called after me, confused. "Where are you going?" "I need some air," I managed, and then I was outside in the cool September night, walking blindly down the street as tears streamed down my face. I called a rideshare and directed it to the airport, even though my return flight wasn't until the next afternoon. I couldn't spend another minute in that house, pretending to be someone I wasn't. I would sleep at the airport if necessary, but I needed to get back to Chicago, back to James, back to my real life. In the car, I called James, barely able to speak through my tears. "I couldn't do it," I sobbed. "I tried, but and then the phone rang, and I ran away, James. I literally ran away." "Where are you now?" His voice was concerned but steady. "In a car to the airport. I'll try to get on an earlier flight." "Okay," he said simply. "I'll be waiting for you, whatever time you get here." During the entire journey back to Chicago. The wait at the airport, the last-minute ticket purchase at an exorbitant price, the midnight flight, I wrestled with what had happened. Why couldn't I stand up to my mother? Why did her opinion still hold such power over me? And most importantly, how had I allowed her disapproval to overshadow the best thing in my life? By the time the plane landed in Chicago at 2 a.m., I had reached a breaking point. Something had to change, and it couldn't be James or our marriage. It had to be my relationship with my mother and my willingness to live authentically, regardless of her reaction. James was waiting at arrivals, his face lined with worry. When he saw me, he opened his arms without a word, and I walked straight into his embrace, finally feeling like I could breathe again. "I'm sorry," I whispered against his chest. "I'm so sorry I've been such a coward." He held me tighter. "You're the bravest person I know," he said. "You just haven't realized it yet." That night, as we lay in our bed in our shared home, I made a decision. "I want to invite my mother here," I said. "To our home. And tell her everything, face to face." James propped himself up on one elbow. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's time. More than time. And I want to do it here, on my territory, not hers. Where I can remember who I really am." James kissed my forehead. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. 100%. As I drifted off to sleep in my husband's arms, I felt a weight lifting. The confrontation to come would be difficult, perhaps even devastating. But continuing to live a lie had become impossible. It was time to tear down the wall I'd built between the different parts of my life and face whatever lay on the other side. Planning the reveal was surprisingly liberating. Once I'd committed to telling my mother the truth, I felt a sense of purpose I'd been missing for months. James and I agreed that we would invite my parents to Chicago for a weekend in October, about 3 weeks away. This would give me time to prepare both practically and emotionally. Should we tell them why we're inviting them? James asked as we discussed the details. I shook my head. If Mom knew there was a serious conversation coming, she'd spend the entire time until then trying to control it from a distance. Let's just say I want them to see my home and meet some important people in my life. The initial phone call to extend the invitation went better than expected. Mom was surprised. I rarely invited them to Chicago, but seemed pleased by the gesture. It's about time you showed us where you live, she said. I've been telling your father for years we should just show up on your doorstep someday. The thought made me shudder, imagining them arriving unannounced to find James and our obviously shared life. Well, now's your chance, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. I've finally got the place looking the way I want it. Dad seemed genuinely excited to visit. I'd love to see some of your projects, he said when Mom passed him the phone. You've been doing such interesting work from what I can tell. His simple expression of interest in my professional life touched me deeply, highlighting how rarely such support came from my mother. Over the next 3 weeks, James and I prepared our condo for the visit. We discussed whether to remove evidence of our marriage before they arrived, the wedding photo on our mantle, James's clothes in our shared closet, and ultimately decided against it. This is who we are, James said firmly. If we hide it before telling them, we're just continuing the pattern. He was right, of course. Still, I found myself anxious about every detail. Would Mom comment on the masculine touches in the decor? Would she notice James's architectural books mixed with mine on the shelves before we had a chance to explain? Rachel came over the weekend before the visit to offer moral support and practical advice. You know she's going to make this about her, she warned as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony. Be prepared for tears, guilt-tripping, the whole show. I know, I sighed. I'm trying to accept that I can't control her reaction. I can only control how I respond to it. Rachel squeezed my hand. That's the healthiest thing I've ever heard you say about your mother. The day of their arrival, I took the afternoon off work to make final preparations. James would come home early so he could be there when my parents arrived. We had decided to tell them right away, rather than waiting until later in the visit. Better to have the truth in the open, even if it made the remainder of their stay uncomfortable. At exactly 4 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt, and opened the door to find my parents standing there, my mother already looking around critically at the hallway of my building. Autumn, honey, she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of her signature Chanel perfume. This is a nice building, much better than I expected. Dad hugged me next, his embrace warmer and less performative. The place looks great, sweetheart, he said, seeming to genuinely mean it. I ushered them inside, heart pounding. Come in, there's someone I want you to meet. James stood in the living room, wearing a blue button-down shirt that brought out his eyes. He looked calm, but I could detect his nervousness in the way he clasped his hands in front of him. Mom, Dad, this is James Mitchell, I said, moving to stand beside him. My husband. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mom froze, her eyes darting from James to me, then to our hands where matching gold bands gleamed. You're, what? She finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad looked stunned but recovered more quickly. Husband, he repeated, extending his hand to James. Well, this is certainly a surprise. James shook his hand firmly. It's good to meet you, Mr. Reynolds. I've heard a lot about you both. When? Mom demanded, ignoring James completely and staring at me. How long have you been married? Since June of last year, I answered, working to keep my voice steady. Almost 16 months now. Mom sank onto the nearest chair without being invited, her purse clutched in white-knuckled hands. 16 months, she repeated hollowly. You've been married for 16 months and didn't tell us? Dad was looking around the apartment, noticing the obvious signs of James's presence. The 2 coffee mugs on the counter, the shared bookshelf, the framed photo from our wedding day. Why don't we all sit down? James suggested gently. We have some explaining to do, and I'm sure you have questions. Questions? Mom's voice rose sharply. Questions doesn't begin to cover it. How could you do this, Autumn? How could you get married without your own mother present? There it was, exactly as Rachel had predicted. Not hurt that she'd missed an important moment in my life, but outraged that I'd deprived her of her maternal role. We moved to the living room, James and I on the sofa, my parents in armchairs across from us. Mom perched on the edge of her seat, still clutching her purse as if ready to flee at any moment. Dad sat back, his expression troubled but thoughtful. We had a small, private ceremony, I explained, reaching for James's hand. Just Rachel and James's brother Michael as witnesses. It was beautiful and meaningful to us. But why the secrecy? Dad asked. Were you in some kind of trouble? No, nothing like that, James assured him. We simply wanted our wedding to be about us and our commitment to each other, without external pressures or expectations. Mom made a small, wounded sound. External pressures? Is that what your family is to you, Autumn? An external pressure? I took a deep breath. Mom, you and I have very different ideas about what my life should look like. You've made it clear for years that you think my focus on my career is a mistake, that I should have prioritized marriage and children much earlier. I only ever wanted what was best for you, she protested. What you thought was best for me, I corrected. But it wasn't what I wanted. And when I finally found someone, who makes me truly happy, I was afraid you would find a way to make it fit your vision rather than respecting ours. Mom's eyes filled with tears. So you shut me out completely? Denied me the chance to see my only daughter get married? I didn't want a big wedding with all the trappings, I said. Neither did James. We wanted something intimate and personal. You could have told us afterward, Dad pointed out, his tone more sad than angry. Why keep it secret for so long? I looked at James, drawing strength from his steady presence. At first, we just wanted to enjoy being newlyweds without dealing with everyone's reactions. Then, the longer we waited, the harder it became to find the right moment. There is no right moment to tell your parents you've been lying to them for over a year, Mom said bitterly. That's fair, I acknowledged. And I'm sorry for the secrecy. It wasn't fair to you, and honestly, it wasn't good for us either. James nodded. Living a double life has been difficult for both of us. That's why we wanted to tell you now, in person, and answer any questions you have. Mom stood abruptly. I need some air, she announced, and walked out onto the balcony, closing the door behind her. Dad watched her go, then turned back to us with a weary sigh. Give her a few minutes, he advised. This is a lot to process. While Mom composed herself outside, Dad took the opportunity to get to know James, asking about his work and how we had met. Their conversation had an underlying tension but was civil, even warm at moments. I began to hope that at least one of my parents might eventually understand our choice. When Mom returned, her eyes were red but her composure restored. She sat down and looked directly at James for the first time. So, James, she said, her voice carefully controlled, tell me about yourself and your family. For the next hour, James patiently answered all her questions about his background, education, previous marriage, and career. I could see her mentally categorizing him, trying to fit him into her worldview. He was successful, well-educated, and from a respectable family, all points in his favor by her standards. But he had been divorced, was older than me, and clearly supported my career ambitions, potential strikes against him. Throughout this interrogation, I felt a familiar pattern reasserting itself, my desire to earn her approval, to prove we had made a good decision. I caught myself emphasizing aspects of our relationship I thought she would value, minimizing those she might disapprove of. Then, watching James answer yet another probing question with patience and honesty, I realized something important: I didn't need her approval anymore. I was a grown woman who had built a successful career and found a partner who loved and respected me exactly as I was. Her opinion, while still painful to hear, no longer had the power to define me. "Mom," I interrupted as she began another question about James's financial situation, "I understand you're trying to get to know James, and that's important. But I need to say something clearly: we didn't invite you here to seek your blessing or approval. We're already married. We love each other. We're happy. I'm sharing this with you because you're my family and I want you in my life, but not if it means constantly defending my choices." The room fell silent. Mom stared at me, shock evident on her face. I had never spoken to her so directly before. Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother is just concerned for your happiness, Autumn." "I know," I acknowledged. "But I'm telling you both right now that I am happy. Happier than I've ever been. James is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I won't let anyone, not even you, Mom, make me feel like I've done something wrong by marrying him." Mom's face crumpled. For a moment, I thought she might storm out or launch into one of her cold, withering silences that could last for days. Instead, to my surprise, she began to cry, not the controlled, manipulative tears I'd seen before, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere genuine. "I just wanted to be there," she managed between sobs. "To see you walk down the aisle. To help you pick a dress. Is that so terrible?" The raw emotion in her voice caught me off guard. Behind her controlling behavior and critical comments, had there been simply a mother who wanted to share in her daughter's important moments? James, sensing a shift in the conversation, quietly excused himself to make coffee, giving me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder as he passed. Left alone with my parents, I moved to sit beside my mother, tentatively placing a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry you missed the wedding," I said, and meant it. "But I'm not sorry for how we chose to get married. It was perfect for us." Dad reached across and took Mom's other hand. "Barbara," he said gently, "we've lost so much time already with Autumn because of expectations. Maybe it's time to focus on the future instead of what we've missed." His words surprised me. Had he always seen the dynamic between Mom and me so clearly? Why had he never intervened before? Mom took several deep breaths, visibly trying to compose herself. "I don't know how to be the mother of someone who doesn't need me," she finally said, her voice small. The admission hit me like a physical blow. For all her controlling behavior, all her criticism and judgment, my mother was afraid of becoming irrelevant in my life. "I do need you, Mom," I said. "Just not to plan my life for me. I need you to see me as I am and love that person, not the daughter you imagined I should be." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of decades of misunderstandings and unspoken feelings between us. "I don't know if I know how to do that," she admitted. "But I don't want to lose you." It wasn't a complete transformation, not by any means. But it was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. James returned with coffee, reading the room with the sensitivity that was so characteristic of him. "Should I give you more time to talk?" he offered. "No," I said, making room for him beside me. "You're family now too. You should be part of this." The remainder of the evening was tense but civil. We ordered dinner in and showed my parents our wedding photos. Mom cried again when she saw me in my dress, but the tears seemed less bitter than before. When they left for their hotel around 10, nothing was resolved completely. Mom hugged me stiffly at the door, whispering, "We'll talk more tomorrow," in a tone I couldn't quite interpret. Dad embraced me warmly and shook James's hand, saying sincerely, "Welcome to the family, son." After they left, James and I collapsed onto our couch, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter than before. "That went better than I expected in some ways, worse in others," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. "It was a beginning," James replied, kissing the top of my head. An honest one, at least. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I realized he was right. For the first time in my adult life, I had shown my parents, especially my mother, my authentic self, not the version I thought they wanted to see. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. Whatever happened next, at least we would be building on truth, not pretense. The road ahead with my mother would not be easy. Years of patterns and expectations couldn't be dismantled in a single evening. But for the first time, I felt hope that we might eventually find a new way to relate to each other, one based on who we actually were, not who we wished the other would be. The weekend with my parents continued with a fragile truce. Mom was clearly still processing her feelings, vacillating between hurt silence and tentative efforts to connect. During a tour of the architectural firm where I worked, she actually asked thoughtful questions about my current projects. At dinner that evening, she made a visible effort to engage James in conversation, asking about his restoration work with what seemed like genuine interest. Dad, meanwhile, was emerging as an unexpected ally. Over breakfast at a cafe near our condo, while Mom was in the restroom, he leaned across the table and said quietly, "I want you to know I understand why you did what you did. Your mother can be overwhelming when she gets an idea in her head." "You noticed?" I replied with a small smile. He chuckled ruefully. "I've been married to her for 40 years, Autumn. Of course I noticed. I should have stepped in more often when you were growing up, created more space for you to be yourself." His eyes grew serious. "I'm sorry for that." His apology moved me deeply. "Thank you, Dad." After my parents returned to Boston, there were 3 weeks of uncomfortable silence from my mother. She didn't call for our usual Sunday check-in, didn't respond to the photos I emailed of James and me at a charity event for historic building preservation. The silence was both painful and, paradoxically, peaceful. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't performing for her approval or carefully editing my words to avoid criticism. "Give her time," James advised when I expressed concern about the extended silence. "This is a major adjustment for her." Just as I was beginning to wonder if my mother would ever speak to me again, my phone rang on a Wednesday evening in early November. Mom's name appeared on the screen, sending a jolt of nervous anticipation through me. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Autumn," she said, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant. "I was wondering if you might be free to meet for coffee this weekend. I'm coming to Chicago for a friend's birthday and I thought we should talk." My pulse quickened. "Just you? Not Dad?" "Just me," she confirmed. "I think we need some mother-daughter time." That Saturday, I met her at a quiet cafe near my condo, arriving early to secure a corner table where we would have some privacy. When she walked in, I was struck by how small she looked, my formidable mother suddenly seeming vulnerable in a way I'd never noticed before. We ordered a latte for me, Earl Grey tea for her, and sat in awkward silence until our drinks arrived. "Thank you for meeting me," she finally said, stirring her tea unnecessarily. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks." "Me too," I admitted. She took a deep breath. "I want to start by saying I'm still hurt that you kept your marriage a secret from me. That pain isn't going to disappear overnight." I nodded, accepting this reality. "I understand. But," she continued, surprising me, "I've been trying to understand why you felt you needed to hide something so important. And I've had to face some uncomfortable truths about myself and how I've treated you." I waited, hardly daring to breathe, as she gathered her thoughts. "Your father pointed out, rather forcefully, actually, that I've spent years trying to make you into a carbon copy of me, without ever really seeing or appreciating who you actually are." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "He said I've been so busy being disappointed in the daughter I didn't get that I failed to celebrate the amazing woman you've become." Tears pricked at my eyes. I couldn't remember my mother ever acknowledging my achievements or choices with such clarity. "Did you know I wanted to study interior design when I was young?" she continued, her voice taking on a faraway quality. "My parents insisted it wasn't a proper career for a respectable young woman. I met your father my sophomore year of college, dropped out to get married, and never went back. She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger. I think maybe I've been pushing you toward the life I thought I was supposed to want, without ever questioning whether it was what you needed. The revelation stunned me. In all our years together, my mother had never shared this aspect of her past. I had always assumed she had wanted exactly the life she had. Mom, I had no idea. She shrugged slightly. It wasn't something I allowed myself to think about very often. But seeing you build this career you love, finding a partner who supports that, it's brought up a lot of what-ifs for me. We talked for nearly 3 hours, moving beyond the surface conflicts that had defined our relationship for so long and into deeper waters. Mom spoke of her own mother's rigid expectations, her early dreams, the ways she had channeled her creative energies into homemaking when other avenues were closed to her. I shared how her criticism had shaped me, making me driven and resilient in some ways, insecure and conflict avoidant in others. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were tears, defensive moments, old wounds reopened. But there was also, for perhaps the first time, real honesty between us. I can't promise I'll change overnight, Mom said as we prepared to leave. I've been this way for 65 years. But I want to try to see you more clearly. To listen more and judge less. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's all I've ever wanted. In the weeks that followed, we established a new pattern of communication. Our Sunday calls resumed, but with a different quality. Mom made visible efforts to ask about my work with genuine interest. I found myself sharing more about my actual life, including the joys and challenges of marriage to James, without the careful filtering I'd always employed before. There were still difficult moments. When I mentioned that James and I were considering starting a family in the next year or two, Mom immediately launched into advice about timing and childcare arrangements. But when I gently pointed out that she was doing exactly what we had discussed, she caught herself and apologized, something the old Barbara Reynolds would never have done. As Christmas approached, James and I decided to host a small reception at our condo for family and close friends, a belated celebration of our marriage. When I called to invite my parents, Mom's response surprised me. "Would you like me to help with anything?" she asked. "Not to take over," she added quickly, "just to contribute, if you'd like." I assigned her a manageable task. Coordinating the caterer, something that played to her organizational strengths without giving her control of the entire event. She embraced the role with enthusiasm but, remarkably, checked with me before making decisions. The reception itself, held 2 weeks before Christmas, was everything our secret wedding hadn't been, a joyful, public acknowledgement of our commitment surrounded by the people we loved. Rachel gave a heartfelt toast about watching our relationship bloom. James's brother Michael shared funny stories about James as a romantically challenged teenager. And then, unexpectedly, my father asked for everyone's attention. "Barbara and I missed Autumn and James's wedding last year," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we're here now to celebrate their union and to wish them all the happiness in the world." He raised his glass. "To second chances and new beginnings, not just for these two, but for all of us who love them." As applause filled the room, I caught my mother's eye across the crowd. She was smiling through tears, and when she mouthed "I love you," I knew she meant it without conditions or expectations for perhaps the first time. Later that night, after the guests had gone and James and I were cleaning up, he wrapped his arms around me from behind. "How do you feel?" he asked, his breath warm against my ear. I leaned back into his embrace, considering the question. "Whole," I finally answered. "Like all the pieces of my life are finally in the same place." In the months that followed, the healing between my mother and me continued, not without setbacks but with a mutual commitment to doing better. She found a seniors watercolor class and began painting again after a 50-year hiatus. I made more regular trips to Boston, bringing James along to be fully integrated into family gatherings. The old dynamics occasionally resurfaced, but we now had tools and awareness to address them before they could take hold. Perhaps the most profound change came in April, when James and I discovered I was pregnant. Telling my mother was still anxiety-inducing. I half expected her to take over, to flood me with unsolicited advice and rigid ideas about proper motherhood. Instead, after her initial excitement, she said something that showed how far we'd come. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Autumn. You'll do it your own way, and that's exactly as it should be." The journey from secrecy to honesty had been painful and difficult, but ultimately healing in ways I couldn't have imagined. By finally standing in my truth, first with myself, then with James, and finally with my family, I had created space for authentic connection that was stronger and more meaningful than the performance of perfection I'd maintained for so long. As I sit here now, feeling the first flutters of my child moving inside me, I understand that the most valuable legacy I can pass on isn't conformity to others' expectations, but the courage to live authentically even when it's frightening. The secret wedding that once seemed like an act of rebellion now reveals itself as the first step toward a more honest life, not just in my marriage, but in all my relationships. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to establish are with the people who love us the most. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to be truthfully, imperfectly ourselves, even when others might prefer a more comfortable illusion. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to stand in our truth, we create the possibility for deeper connection than we ever thought possible. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who thought they knew what was best for you? Or kept a secret to protect your independence? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and hit that share button if you know someone who might need to hear this message of authenticity. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, living your truth may be difficult, but it's always worth it in the end.